So value-based marketing has turned out to be very useful, but it's also going to change the way that organizations interact with the next few generations because they are far less interested in the cheapest or best product unless they know that you at least share some of their values. You don't have to share all of them. That's impossible.
Hey there, I am Dr. Jason Balara, and this is the Know Your Why podcast, where we explore the why behind success. Every week, I meet with real estate investors, veterinary entrepreneurs, mindset coaches, authors, and fitness professionals to uncover their why and how it drives them on the winding road to success. What is your why?
Hi everyone, I'm Jason Balara, and this is the Know Your Why podcast. Today I'm here with Kristin Spencer. Kristin is a multi-category best-selling author, sales consultant, and business nonfiction ghostwriter who specializes in value-centered marketing. Before we started recording, I told you how excited I am to talk about this. I'll start with thank you. Thank you for coming on the show. I really do appreciate you taking the time out.
Jason, I cannot tell you how excited I am to be on your show right now because we actually have like a lot of things that intersect, and I can't wait to talk about that.
That sounds amazing. I'm looking forward to it. Well, let's just start with your story, your background, and then then we'll have a conversation.
Yeah, so I would say my why is that I was a small child who was secretly aspiring to be a scientist. And to give you the very short version, I have a math learning disability called dyscalculia. And no matter how hard I tried to project myself into the upper echelon of math learning so I could take advanced science classes, I could not do it. My brain would not allow me to do it. And so the way that I was able to get through the math and science magnet high school that I went to, because I thought that will help me, is my friends had to explain the different lessons to me using stories. And because of that, I realized, hey, I might not be able to do math well. I have a hard time grasping the concepts, but I can actually make formulas out of words. And that is what I do now every day for my clients and for my own writing projects. And it has turned out to be the best and wildest professional adventure that I could ever go on.
That sounds amazing. We'll talk about all this, but good on your friends to help you with that stuff. I feel like we hear, you hear a lot of stories about bullying or people with, some sort of learning disability or whatever, what struggles in school in whatever category and getting bullied about it and good for your friends for being there and finding a way through it for you. So that's actually, that's inspiring right off the top of the show. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah. In my new book, I actually call them each out by name because I was like, let me do this for them because of what they did for me.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. That's awesome. So, I mean, obviously there's something between there and here. So what, kind of, you went through that and then, kind of what did your road look like after that, after you kind of learned how to, use stories to, I'm sure, solve things other than math problems, but, sort of in life.
Yeah, so actually, I took a pretty significant detour between getting my degree in comparative literature and becoming a writer on the Forbes books ghostwriting bench, which I was thankful to experience and am no longer doing. But I lived in Europe for over 10 years, and my husband and I were humanitarian workers, and part of that time was dedicated to working with those who had been rescued from human trafficking. And I think that's where I really had to learn how to read nonverbal cues, how to ask more questions, how to be more empathetic. And because of that, it made me lean more naturally into value-based marketing and into asking people so many questions. I'm a professional question asker, is what I like to tell people. And that really shaped the way that I was looking at language, the way that I looked at marketing, And originally, I resisted the urge to go into marketing. I didn't feel like it was a personality fit for me. I'm super introverted and I hate high pressure sales tactics. I am not about that. So I resisted it and I had a fiction editing co op. And then when the pandemic happened, I had to pivot in order to make money for my family. As a real estate investor, you'll appreciate this. My husband and I squirreled away all the money we had and we purchased a student housing property. And then it sat vacant for 18 months.
Yeah. Yeah, that wasn't the best time to have student housing, I think, right? that
No, but who
that and
knew?
hotels were hit hard by the pandemic, but both have rebounded quite nicely, so that's good.
Definitely.
When you say value-based marketing, I don't think I've ever heard that combination of words, I guess I would say. Can you define that for me, and then talk a little bit how you kind of got into that at space, I guess, as that specific type of marketing?
Yeah, so I was my mentor in marketing and copywriting is just the most amazing person, and she has the biggest heart. And she was teaching me about how to understand people through sales psychology. And she wasn't really using an ideal client avatar profile. And basically, that's what large marketing firms use most often. And I realized at some point, oh, they're using this because it's easier for them. They're not using this because it gets them better results. And also, it's naturally exclusionary. So if I'm making an ICA for someone, I'm going to be thinking about the people that I grew up around, the people that I interact with most. I'm going to have a really difficult time thinking about underserved groups where there's a lot of potential for my business to grow and for them to have something that they need. So I felt like there's got to be a better way to do this. And that's when I learned about something, and I'm going to use big words right now. I promise I'll break them down, called non segmented psychographics. So, all that non segmented psychographics means is that it's value based marketing, which is why I use that phrase. And non segmented, it means we're not doing really targeted groups. So big giant companies like Coca-Cola, they use segmented psychographics. They invest so much money in looking at each one of these segments. So what happened in the marketing world is people started getting like totally freaked out whenever they would hear the word psychographics because they thought this means spending so much money. But really, if you're doing general psychographics, which is what I specialize in, then you're not investing millions or hundreds of millions of dollars in doing the research associated with that. And I was like, I can't call this psychographics. No one knows what I'm talking about. So I was like, okay, what are psychographics made out of? And maybe you've heard demographics. I don't know. Have you heard that term?
Yes, yeah,
So
that one's familiar.
demographics,
Psychographics, not so much.
right. So demographics is like what age you are, what podcast you listen to, what kind of car you drive, how many kids you have, that sort of information. But psychographics is based on the way you feel and the values you have and your personality traits. So, all that value based marketing is made out of are your convictions, your personality traits, and then your way of life. And if we're thinking about those things, it's not naturally exclusionary. It's not that, oh, well, I'm looking for a white male who's 54 years old who loves to wear a Rolex watch, right? It's more, I'm looking for someone who's passionate about changing the world by creating financial stability for their family and is open to real estate investing. That's a much bigger group. And you can talk to them more directly. So, value based marketing has turned out to be very useful, but it's also going to change the way that organizations interact with the next few generations because they are far less interested in the cheapest or best product unless they know that you at least share some of their values. You don't have to share all of them, that's impossible. But they want you to speak to what's important to you because they prioritize what's important to them.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And I'm guessing that this is where asking a lot of questions comes in, right? Because if you're gonna, I like well, I mean, not to hopefully this is not offensive to anybody. Generally, you can look at someone and guess most of their demographics, right? But
Yeah.
the their value system, their sort of beliefs and all of that, we don't generally have that sort of on the surface, and so that's where asking a lot of questions comes in. I'm guessing, and if you're trying to, where do you start with someone? You take on a client and you're asking, you want to kind of get in their head and help develop that plan for them. Where do you start with?
I ask them 7 pages worth of questions.
Okay.
But I promise them, I'm like, we're going to have fun. I'm super chill. I'm not going to judge you. I can also read people really well. So even if they're not giving me verbal answers, I can sort of come up with how they're feeling and explain that back to them and clarify. And they get to tell me stories about themselves. Like if I sat with you and I just ask you a few questions about your origin story, guess what? I know all the touchstone principles of your entire business because I then know you as a person and your values. So it's like being a person detective or a
Yeah.
value detective.
Yeah.
And I don't tell people, hey, I have 7 pages of questions I'm going to ask you. I'm like, we're just going to have a conversation. And if at any point you feel stuck, please tell me, Kristin, talk more. I'll talk more. I'll explain. This is a conversation. It's not just you answering all these things on your own. I'm here 100% to help you, which is not what we see when someone sends you a 10-page ideal client avatar worksheet and you're by yourself and you're not trained to fill out any of those questions.
Yeah. And I mean, a lot of people do talk about that, sort of ideal avatar. I've had it, been kind of shoved into me. It's like you're a veterinarian, so you should talk to veterinarians, and you should, and that's great. I'm happy to, but I think like it's also, if you're looking at it from a value base, we may not all have exactly the same values or goals, wishes, whatever you want to call it. So it almost seems like what you're talking about open, or broadens your reach, broadens who you're trying to actually speak to, because um or maybe I'm thinking of that backwards, but I would think now you're like, okay, here's my values. That's going to, there are going to be veterinarians that share that. There are going to be plumbers and doctors and lawyers. There's going to be people that have similar values back. You said that many people lean towards that specific avatar, and you said it's because it's easier. And I
It's it's easier for the marketing firm, but they're not telling you that. Because if they're trying to be more broad, if they're trying to get to know your values, that's much more work for them rather than having you fill out a questionnaire. But like you said, the results are going to be better. And while it does broaden who you can reach out to, at the same time, to a certain degree, it's restrictive, right? So
right.
let's say, for example, you have a group that raises capital for the veterinary industry. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. So I ghost wrote a book for a veterinary professional. So I know probably more than I should about this. Um, but if you're targeting people who want to change the way that the industry is for the better because you want hope for these young people who are going to school and have this like massive amount of debt, their job is really hard, there's a high rate of depression, then you're not going to target the guys who think that everything in the industry is honky dory and they don't want to change a thing because you're going to butt heads.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that makes total sense. It, it's a there's a lot of stuff that, in general, that gets said like, this is the way you do it, right? Like this is marketing. You're directing it towards your avatar, and I feel like a lot of times things like that get said in not just in marketing, just like in general. It's like, just like you said, people think this is the way we do it. This is the way we've always done it. So this is the way it should be done, kind of going into and going forward. And Kristin, it seems like maybe I don't know enough about marketing, but it seems like this is a bit of a outside the box, sort of different way of thinking about it. which is fantastic. I love that. I think that's, but am I wrong about that? Is that like, maybe
No,
do you
you're
have
right.
examples
You're
of
right.
who, like what brands we might think about in from a value based marketing standpoint? Are there any? I don't know.
Oh yeah, there are. Actually, I've done a lot of case studies because it's fun and I love using case studies in my corporate consultancy. So, but you're right. This is a very contrarian way of thinking. However, I believe it will gain traction because traditional marketing methods are not going to work on people like my three teenage children who
Right.
despise the idea of capitalism for capitalism's sake. And hopefully I had a small part in that, but in general, that's how all their friends feel too.
Yeah.
So, oh, I totally sidetracked myself. What was I going to explain? Oh,
Just
examples,
yeah, yeah,
brands.
yeah.
Okay, so I'll give two of my favorite examples. The first one is Starbucks. And I know everyone's like, they're so big. How can you use them? They don't care about values. And, I understand that they have shut down so many branches because of the threat of unionization. I'm not okay with that. But I will say they are one of the only companies that does research and then shares their results with the rest of us. A lot of organizations keep those results close because they don't want anyone else to know what they're doing. And Starbucks is not that way. And one of the things that they did in the last few years is they actually surveyed people to find out what was causing friction in their experiences, and they actually created ways to address it, tested it, and rolled out all these methods for making their customers happier. And to me,
Yeah.
that is a display of valuing the biggest thing was valuing their customers' time.
Yeah.
That's a value-based marketing tactic, is what can we. And also at the same time, which I love this, is they did quality control. So they worked on creating consistency of drink flavor and texture throughout all of their different branches. So it was more timely, but it was also more consistent. So those two things catapulted their customer experience. Do you have any questions about Starbucks before I move to
I
the next one?
I do. Maybe not even Starbucks specifically, but related to some of the things you mentioned here. One is I think people, when, again, correct me if you disagree. I'm very happy to be. I'm very okay with being wrong here. So if but you, when we say value based, it doesn't mean that you're going to agree with those values, right? Because isn't that's the whole point, right? People are going to have different values. So someone might, doesn't mean they're not doing value based marketing. They might just have different values than you. Is one thing I would say, or
Yeah,
ask. And then the second thing to that is having value. Being value based. You also, as a business, have to sort of balance that with business practices. So some people
absolutely.
think if you have values, then you should do everything for free and not charge the customer and all of this. And so I think there's that often those things get sort of mixed up where you still have to run a business, and Starbucks wasn't going to do those things if it caused them to go out of business, right? Like it's
Absolutely.
finding those things where those the intersection of value and best business practices go together. Am I way off there, or what do you think about that?
No, you're absolutely right. So, one of the values of a business is that it must maintain profitability because otherwise, what happens? It closes.
Right.
So, when I'm working with someone for the first time and they're like, okay, these are the three different branches of my business, and I notice that there's a money sucking part of it, I'm like, listen, I get it. Okay. I have nonprofit organizations that I love giving to. I will someday have, I'm on a board of a founded nonprofit that my husband and I want to launch at some point. But you cannot have that in your business then. So what I recommend for them to do is to focus on profit in their business, and when the business is profitable enough to where they can take money out and donate it to that passion project, that's when you do it. That's the only way to sustain. If you mix everything together, it's it's not going to be a long-term project, let's say.
Right. Right. Completely agree. Completely agree.
And as far as like, we probably have similar values and differing values because that's how humanity is. We're super complex. Um,
Right.
but when I'm focusing on something in my business and how you value that, that is matching two specific values. So that's what I mean when I'm saying value-based marketing. It doesn't mean that everything that the business is about matches all of the priorities of the client or purchaser, because that's impossible, and that's also how you
Mhm.
wreck a brand. And we've seen that Coinbase actually is one of the examples that I use all the time, because they realized they were involved in social justice issues that had absolutely nothing to do with their business model. So what they did is they pulled back the support for that, and they said, listen, we know this is going to make some of our team members upset, and we understand. And if you feel like you can't stay at this point, we will give you a severance package. We're parting ways in a positive way.
Yeah.
And their stock shot up after that because they were focused on the thing they were doing instead of trying to focus on everything.
Yeah. Yeah. I know it makes total sense. Did you have another example other than
I
Starbucks?
do.
Okay.
I have a really fun one. So do you know Patagonia?
Yes, I know of them. I can't say that not sure I even own anything from them, but I know of the company.
So they are historically a brand that does well with young people. However, as we've seen the priorities of younger generations changing over time, they realized they needed to adapt. And one of the things that they do is they have total transparency with where their items are produced and the quality of those items, because they believe in sustainability and they're environmentally friendly and supportive.
Mhm.
So, in order to prove that to college students all over the country, they went on a tour where they were not selling clothes. They were repairing old clothes for free to help the environment. And that did so much that, they were able to make that transition to the younger generation by showing, we are not even going to make any money doing this. We just want to show you how much we care about this. And so we're going to fix all the things you love that you don't want to throw away so that they can still serve you.
Yeah, no, it's great. I really do love like the intersection of business and impact and value and all of that. I think that and it's not easy, but it's also like not impossible, right? It can be
Right.
done, and it's just I think, and I'd be interested your thought on this. One brand that comes to mind for me is Bombas. Do you
Oh,
know
yeah.
who? Yeah, like so their mission. They started out right. They make socks. They make more things now, but they started out making socks because they went around and asked homeless people what's the thing they need the most,
Yeah.
and they said socks. And so every time you buy a pair of socks from Bombas, you get they give a pair of socks to the homeless. Amazing mission, but there's some other things to it that I think like maybe get missed that are really from a business perspective really great. First of all, they're incredible socks, and I won't wear any others anymore. Right? So they
They're the
made
best socks,
right. They're
right? They're so high in quality. They
yeah
did so much research and development. They didn't just make socks. They're like, we're going to invent new socks that hug your
right
feet like they were made just for them.
right like and I'm not I have no affiliation with Bombas. I get nothing
Me
from
neither.
them. I just like I always thought of socks as like a silly thing I didn't care about until I bought them the first time because of their mission. I bought them the first time because I was like, this is cool. I need some new socks. These people give socks to homeless people. Great. I have never bought any other socks since then. Like it just there's not and it's like every Christmas, like our family gets Bombas socks because we're like, these are great. But the other thing is they're not cheap, right? So
No.
they're not giving them away, but that's there's the business side of it, right? Like they made a high quality product, they sold it for what it's worth, they sell it for what it's worth, and then oh by the way, we're helping homeless people at the same time. Like to me that's like the perfect intersection of business and impact. Like it's like seeing things like that, and so I don't know if you think I'm way off base there, but I just
You took no, you are, so because they did the investment to create the huggable foot sock that they invented, right? They have proprietary technology in order to make these socks. They were able to make a high quality sock that would sustain the side mission. So they went for profitability first, which is
Mhm.
exactly what you're saying, which is exactly what I would recommend. And we see that for them, it worked wonderfully.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm sure there's lots of other companies that have done similar, but I think it's just I don't. I think sometimes people try to have that sort of impact driven mission, but also don't want they don't want to they want their product to be inexpensive because that they think that's part of
Right.
the mission. And
Right.
it's like
Yeah.
I don't know that you can do both well. I think you have to choose, like, I'm going to have an impact driven product, or I'm going to have an inexpensive thing that people can get for cheap. I just don't know that it goes together well. Maybe someone does it well. I don't know. But like Starbucks, go back to your first example. Starbucks not cheap, right? It's not.
No.
People don't go to Starbucks because they're gonna save money by getting their coffee there. In fact,
Right.
Starbucks is always named as the thing you should cut out if you're trying to save money.
Mhm.
And so it's just kind of recognizing some of those pieces. Sorry, I feel like I sidetracked you there, a bit of a
No, you
bombast
didn't at
tangent.
all. Well, that's
Um,
actually a really important tangent because, also to your point, I feel like a lot of brands feel like value based marketing is that. They're like, we'll come up with some kind of charity thing we can do, and then we'll sell our product, and people will be like, this is amazing because they're doing this thing that I care about. And the product isn't related to it at all. It's a gimmick, and people do not like gimmicks, and it causes mistrust to increase. And in marketing, our number one job is to decrease purchaser mistrust. So it does opposite of what they want. And like you said, it causes hemorrhaging in their profitability so they can't even stay
yeah,
open.
yeah, yeah. Um, well, I told you when we started I was going to ask you semi-personal questions, and this one isn't even semi. This is related to because of what you just said. So we have a fund, a real estate investment fund, and we call it the Veterinary Impact Fund. The reason we call it that is a couple of reasons. One is part of the impact is just like the education and the awareness that there are
Yes.
ways to better your financial position in other than working yourselves to the bone. um, but also, we are donating a portion of the profits to Not One More Vet, which if you
Right.
ghost write a veterinary book, you might know, but they
Yeah,
support
I do.
veterinarians with mental health struggle. But I always make a point to say you should not invest in the fund because we're donating to charity. That's coming out in the back end from us as a company. You should invest because it will make you money. That's why you should invest. And I think, related to what you just said, it's I don't know, maybe it looks like a gimmick to people what we're doing, and but it's not. It is not meant to get people into the fund. It's just something that we want to do as a way to give back to the community. And so, I'd be
Yeah.
interested your take on, um, from a marketing perspective, good idea, bad idea. What do you think
No,
about something like
I
that?
love it. I love it because they're related. And also, yes, of course, I wrote about that when I was writing this book
Right, right,
because, and the people in your community are going to connect to that. Right? Like, and maybe it's even a resource that some of them are using. So they're like,
right.
oh, I appreciate this. But like you said, that's not the reason to join. And I think that's where the line is. If you're like, join because we're doing this,
Yeah,
then there's a disconnect in the message. But you're like, join because we're going to make money. And they're like, okay, cool. And then you're like, and we do this because we feel so passionate about it. And they're like, that makes total sense. Those two things are connected. And that's something that the person who has similar values to you and your fund would appreciate, and it makes them feel even more connected. So it's beneficial all the way around.
yeah, yeah. And I always it has been something that I've thought a lot about, in just kind of like, was that a good idea? Was that a bad idea? And I think you just I don't I never wanted people to. I just wanted to do something to help, but I never wanted people to think that was the gimmick for the fund, because you absolutely shouldn't invest, because if you just want to give to charity, just give to charity. Like, don't
Right, right. Do it
you can do
directly.
that without my help. They'll accept your donation. Like, there's no.
Yeah.
And so it was just something that I wanted to touch on there. So when you're bringing on a client, and you say you ask them 7 pages of questions, which sounds very daunting, but I get it. I get why you would want to really dive into that. That if it's value based, like really need to know that person.
Yeah.
Um, Tactically, what do you? And I'm sure it's individual business specific, but tactically, what do you kind of do with that information? And then how do you sort of structure a marketing campaign for them? And again, if this is hard to say because of specifics, I get it, but I just
I
maybe
don't
some
I
tips.
give away I give away everything. If you buy my new book, it has like all of the tens of thousands of dollars worth of sales psychology I learned in it, just because I want everyone to know, but people who don't want to implement, call me, right? That's the whole idea.
Right.
Um but so once we talk, I can usually it doesn't take me very long to identify where their problems are happening, right? Because there's some sort of I should have done this that they implemented that maybe wasn't the best choice for them. And I see this all the time because of these high ticket, and not that there's anything wrong with high ticket. I develop high ticket programs for my authors that I ghostwrite for, because that's how they can pay off working with me, is they have to have something high ticket. But there are a lot of these plug and play high ticket offers that are like, just do what worked for me. And unless we can customize, we can't make it work for you. We absolutely can't. And that's why I need to ask all those questions. That's why I need to know what your skill set is, what you really want to be doing. Because I learned this the hard way with clients, where I'd be like, okay, this is what's selling right now. I'm going to build this for them. And then I would give it to them and they would be like, so I don't want to do this. And I'm like, oh, I probably should have asked what you wanted to do
Yeah.
beforehand, because now we have this great deliverable that is going to be completely worthless to you. And that's not what I wanted. So I had to figure out a way to help them be honest with me, to get their history so I know what they actually can do, what they like to do. Most people always underestimate their own skills. So they need someone like me to say, hey, guess what? You're doing these 8 things really well. Let's bundle this in a way that feels comfortable for you. And then we're going to put a price that's actually competitive in your industry's market, instead of the price that you sort of feel like you can charge, which is causing you not to be profitable. So I create their origin story, I create their touchstone principle, I help them like I give them the normal objections that they're facing, how to refute those objections, and then I give them 3 offers. I normally give them an introductory offer, which is like your complimentary one, the one that people get to know you. Like for you, your podcast is essentially an offer, right? Where people are getting to know you and they're like, okay, I support this. I want to learn more about real estate slash veterinary surgery or veterinary funds,
Yeah.
which is a very specific combination that I love because it makes you unique. And then, we do a mid tier and then a high ticket usually, and it helps them see, even if they're not going to use the exact offer I create, it gives them options. It opens their mind to see what the possibilities are, which a lot of people have said is so much more beneficial than the giant crazy report they get from one of these mega firms that is full of information that has no practical application.
Yeah. It's a interesting. One thing you said that stuck out with me, and I've seen this. I mean, I've been in commercial real estate since 2020, so not. I mean, there's people who've been doing it for decades, but so I don't. I'm certainly not the most experienced person. But one of the things I've noticed is through the market cycles, right? So things were really, we had the pandemic, and then but then from the pandemic, things went sort of crazy in a good direction in a way, right? And there was a lot of marketing around how well I did, how much money I made my investors and things like that.
Yeah.
And then the market got bad. And now there's a lot of programs on capital raising. And I'm like, not to disparage any of them, but the point is, it's like, I get it. People find a problem. There's a problem in the world. Let's come up with a solution to it. But the thing is, you have some of these like huge capital raising groups, and everybody's just doing the same exact thing. It's the same strategy with their own name on it, and I know that because I get the emails. I see like this, the same thing coming through, and so I mean the idea of sort of a more customized plan uh, based around your own values, to me, is just very, very appealing in a way to stand out. And I think, one of my favorite people to from a marketing perspective, just to like his content, is Gary V. um,
Yeah.
because I think everything he puts out there is basically, sort of value based, about empathy, kindness, like just being a good person. And so you know what he's about. Also, oh, by the way, he's phenomenal at marketing, but like he's
Right.
just he just seems like a good person. And so you kind of those type of marketing campaigns stand out. Obviously, he owns a big marketing conglomerate and has that is his is his bread and butter. But it's just kind of cool to
Right.
see people that do things a little bit different, and being able to stand out from what everybody else is doing, is I think is actually beneficial, appealing, and, as you mentioned earlier, moving forward, like the younger generations, I think they're going to want to see more of that.
Well, and they deserve that. And that's, when I talk to someone who has gone through a program with zero customization, and I'm sure Gary V's programs have customization because of their price point, and you're like, yes, I will pay for customization, right?
Yeah.
When you have that, you have a much greater chance of success because you can say, like, for example, let's say I know this isn't true because you're on video right now, but let's say you're terrified of going on video. And I'm like, well,
That
you
is true,
have to
actually.
be a YouTube influencer or else you can never be successful. How
Yeah.
can I help you? It's impossible.
Yeah. 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 No, I actually kind of hate being on video, but people told me you're supposed to have a podcast. That's the that's
Well,
the
you were
good.
able to work through it.
Yeah, and I mean that's kind of the interesting thing about that is I I'm able to kind of put that aside and enjoy the conversation, right? So like, don't think about that anyone's going to watch this someday. Try not to look at my side of the screen, like that kind of stuff. But but yeah, marketing is, I said this before we start, it's just a fascinating thing that I think I just love learning about. So I appreciate what you've shared here today. I don't keep you all day. I do want to ask you the questions that I ask every guest, Kristin, and you already touched on the first one. Is I always ask everyone, what is your why? You touched on it before, and I just want to see, if there's anything you want to expand on there or add to it.
Well, one of the biggest reasons that I have my own business is because of my kids. And I know for you, you said this too, right? They're a
Yeah,
huge part of your why.
yeah,
And, my family went through a trauma where we had to leave the country where we were living suddenly because we lost my father in law due to a skiing accident.
I don't know.
And he was like this huge, amazing, important person in their lives and in my life, and obviously my husband's life because it's his dad. And I applied for all these jobs and they all wanted me out until 7 p.m. And I'm like, my kids need me around right now.
Mm-hmm.
And so because of this, I can be flexible. And like, I have one of my kids is on the spectrum, right? So we have in house therapy and I need to be home when the therapist is here, and her hours are not conducive to a traditional working schedule. So that's where I'm at in my life. And my husband's a truck driver, so he wakes up at 2 or 3 in the morning every morning. So I get up and I can work before the kids are awake. And
Yeah,
because I can be flexible, that's one of my biggest whys.
yeah, yeah. Time freedom is. I mean, I talk about it a lot on the podcast, and just in in life in general, because it is so important. And I think people look at investing or being a business owner or entrepreneur or whatever, they look at that as people do it for the money, and it's just not. It's just not. It's truly so that, you can be there for your kids. It's so that I can be there for, that I can record some podcasts, and then I can go pick up my daughter from school, like that. Like, if I was working full time as a veterinary surgeon, which I have done, like, there's on call, there's, the long days, I never know when I'm coming home, like, you'd be home for dinner, I don't know, we might have an emergency, like, I gotta sit here and wait, that kind of thing. And it's
Right.
just like, as much as I love doing surgery, being in that, being kind of locked into to someone else's schedule in that capacity, just, it's not worth it. It's like, it's not worth missing out, what my kids are doing. And so I completely agree. And I think that the time piece, the time freedom piece, is just, that's it. Like, that's that is the real gold in life. It just being able to be there for them. So um really cool. uh this one is just sort of a silly question, but I like to ask people, what tell us something about yourself that maybe isn't common knowledge, special skill, a hobby, something that just lets listeners know you better.
So I'm like a huge Marvel nerd, and I see your DC stuff in the background,
I was like,
and
yeah,
I'm
you
I
could
mean,
see
but
all
I
the
love
stuff behind you.
I love Batman. Michael Keaton is my Batman forever, forever, forever. But I'm like a huge nerd to the point where I dress up as Hanna Solo, the girl version of Han Solo from Star Wars,
Yeah,
and my husband cosplays as Chewbacca, so I'm his handler.
there you go.
So, and people cry when they see him, like them just hugging, like it's the best. It's the best thing ever. But I'm a much bigger nerd than people think I am.
Yeah, well, people know this because I've said it on the podcast before, but my son's name is Logan, and that is after Wolverine. That's that's not just some. I'm also from Boston, where it's Logan Airport, and so sometimes people think I named him after an airport, and I'm like, oh, that's just a happy coincidence, I guess. But no, we
So
he
my
is.
husband had the Logan chops right
Yeah.
before I met him, and our 6 month anniversary was we went to see X-Men 3. Like, I used to sneak into my brother's room to read his X-Men cards because my parents didn't think it was appropriate for girls. So
Yeah, yeah, no, my kids are still a little young, but I cannot wait to just sit and watch, like, all start to finish, like, all the Marvel movies with them. It's going to be amazing. When
awesome.
people hear this and they want to reach out to you, what's the best place?
So I mostly hang out on LinkedIn, Kristin and Spencer, because there's another Kristin Spencer who's a very famous wedding photographer. I'm not her. I don't want to do wedding photography ever. And you can check out my firm's website. It's litsym.com, LITSYM.com. And you can find out more about what we do if you're interested in that there.
Okay, and we'll put all of that in the show notes as well. My last question for you, Kristen: what advice would you give to someone who wants to get started on their marketing journey? They hear this, they're excited, inspired by what you have shared today. What would you tell them as some good, first steps?
I would say don't go hire a firm first. Don't do that, because a lot of especially startups, they're like, we have this capital we've raised, we're going to invest it in this firm who's going to build out all this stuff for us. And firms do not build out everything for you. If you don't have a proven offer that's validated for them to point to, they cannot succeed, actually. So the first step is validation before you do any marketing, which means maybe you go up to 5 people in your industry and you're like, hey, will you pay me for this? And if they say no, you're like, okay, it's not validated. We've got to figure out a different way to pitch this, or a different thing that's close to sell. Because without that validation piece, you cannot have marketing success. And I think a lot of people do that in the opposite order.
I like that. That's great. Start with something validated before. It also just going to save you money, right? You're not going to
So much money.
spend so much money on marketing something that just isn't likely to succeed. So I love that. Kristen, thank you so much for being on the show today. Really enjoyed this conversation. I think people are going to get really a lot of value out of it, and just some very tactical, like, marketing strategies, ways to think about it, and set yourself apart. So thank you so much for your time today.
Well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Folks listening, I know you're going to love this one. Please connect with Kristin and like, rate, and review the show so we can get more great guests. And thank you all for listening.
Hey there, I am Dr. Jason Balara, and this is the Know Your Why podcast, where we explore the why behind success. Every week, I meet with real estate investors, veterinary entrepreneurs, mindset coaches, authors, and fitness professionals to uncover their why and how it drives them on the winding road to success. What is your why?